Clara Okafor Bell was 34 years old when she found the closet empty. 8 months earlier, her husband had convinced her to quit her actuarial job, "So you can focus on us," he'd said. And just like that, the household became his to manage. That night, a bank alert lit up her phone. The joint accounts were drained to zero. On the counter sat a note in Desmond's handwriting. "This isn't working. I need more than this life can give me." No goodbye. No explanation. He hadn't even bothered to take the throw pillow she'd picked out together. 3 years later, Desmond was at a dinner party when he turned on the TV and saw her face. Clara Okafor Bell, co-CEO of a $100 million risk modeling company, calmly explaining the exact methodology he'd once stolen and presented as his own. He recognized every line of it. His hands started shaking before his guests even noticed. He called her phone. She didn't answer. He called again, 37 times, and not once did she pick up. What Desmond didn't know was that those 37 missed calls were the least of what was coming for him, and somewhere across town, Clara watched his name light up her screen, set the phone face down on the table, and went back to her dinner. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today, and if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The laundry basket sat on the bed they shared, full of Desmond's dress shirts and her own folded things mixed together. Clara sorted through them slowly, matching socks, smoothing collars, stacking everything into neat piles. Her hands moved on their own. Her mind moved somewhere else entirely. Mortgage, $2,840. Utilities average, $310. Groceries, $480. Car note, $580. The numbers arranged themselves without effort, the way breathing arranges itself. 15 years of actuarial work had wired her brain for this. The constant quiet hum of calculating risk, spotting gaps, finding the number that didn't sit right. She didn't choose to do it. It just happened. Desmond had told her to stop thinking about money. "That's what I'm here for," he'd said 8 months ago, right after she signed the resignation letter he'd encouraged her to write. He'd kissed her forehead when she handed it in. He'd called it a new chapter. She pressed one of his shirts flat against her palm and folded it in thirds. The house was beautiful. She could give it that. High ceilings, cream walls, an open kitchen that caught the evening light just right. Everything Desmond had picked out, everything he'd said reflected well on them, on the life he was building, the image he was growing into. She had told herself it felt like home. Most days she almost believed it. Dinner was salmon, which she'd made from scratch, and Desmond sat at the head of the table and talked the way he always talked. Big, expansive, full of momentum, like he was presenting to a room of investors instead of just his wife. "Martinez came back with the revised numbers today," he said, cutting into his fish without looking down at it. "Finally got the framing crew locked in. It's going to move fast now." "That's good," Clara said. "It really is. This development is going to change things for us." He said us the way people say obviously, like the word was doing work it didn't need to do. He kept talking. The timeline, the square footage projections, the conversation he'd had with the general contractor about materials costs. Clara listened the way she always listened, quietly, completely, her fork moving slowly while her mind processed what he was saying underneath what he was saying. Then he mentioned the number. "Martinez quoted $84,000 for the electrical rough-in. I told him that was competitive for the scope." Clara set her fork down. Not dramatically, just set it down. "What was the square footage again on that building?" she asked. 2,200 per floor, 4 floors. She did the math in under 3 seconds. That's about $950 a square foot for rough electrical. Standard range is $300 to $400 on commercial builds, even at the high end. Desmond looked up from his plate. "You're saying he overcharged you," she said. "By somewhere around 50, maybe 60,000, depending on what's actually in the scope." For a moment, just a moment, she saw it, the flicker of something behind his eyes, the fast calculation of a man who hadn't caught what she'd just caught, and knew it. Then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach anything. "Clara," he said her name slowly, like a gentle correction. "Martinez has been in this industry for 20 years. I think he knows his numbers. I'm just saying, you're doing that thing again. He picked up his fork. The audit thing, where you can't just let a dinner be a dinner. The air in the room didn't change. Clara's face didn't change. She reached for her glass of water and took a small sip and said nothing. The business side isn't really your department anymore, he said lightly, almost kindly. You know that. We agreed. She nodded once. He went back to talking, the timeline, the investors, the vision. She listened to the rest of it and said the right things at the right moments, and when she cleared the plates, she did the math again in her head, just to confirm she hadn't made a mistake. She hadn't. By 9 o'clock, Desmond's voice was coming from behind the closed door of his home office, low and even, the sound of him on a call. She heard him laugh once, relaxed, easy, the real laugh, the one she used to think was only for her. She was in bed with a book she wasn't reading when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Alert! A transfer of $47,200 has been made from your joint checking account. She sat up. She opened the app. Her fingers moved quickly, steadily. No shaking. That wasn't who she was. The checking account showed a balance of 0. She clicked to the savings. 0. She sat with that number for a moment. That clean, absolute, impossible 0. And then she got up. The hallway was quiet. The office door was still closed, the light underneath it dark now, the call apparently over. She walked past it, down the hall, to the bedroom where she'd folded his shirts an hour ago. She opened his closet. The hangers were empty. Every suit, every dress shirt, every pair of shoes, gone. All of it. On the dresser, a single sheet of paper. She picked it up. This isn't working. I need more than this life can give me. That was all. She didn't move for a long moment. The closet smelled like his cologne still. That warm cedar and citrus smell she'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. It hung in the empty space like something that hadn't gotten the message yet. Clara's hand rested on one of the bare hangers. It swung slightly, tapping against the rod with a small, hollow sound. She let go of it. She walked to the kitchen because that was what her legs decided to do. The note was there, on the counter near the coffee maker, where she would have seen it first thing in the morning if the bank alert hadn't come tonight instead. She read it again. This isn't working. I need more than this life can give me. 10 words. 11 if you counted the contraction as 2. She counted them twice, the way she counted everything, as if the number might mean something, as if there was a pattern in it. There wasn't. She set the note down, face up, and picked up her phone. Lorraine Okafor arrived 54 minutes later. She knocked twice and let herself in with the spare key Clara had given her years ago, the one Desmond had always found slightly irritating, though he'd never said so directly. She was 61 years old, built like a woman who had carried heavy things her whole life and found a way to do it without complaining, and she walked through the front door in her house slippers and her old church cardigan and looked at Clara standing in the kitchen and said nothing at first. She just looked. Then she said, "Show me the note." Clara slid it across the counter. Lorraine read it. Her jaw tightened. She set it back down. 11 words, Clara said quietly. 10, Lorraine said. Contractions count as 1. She looked up. Are you hurt? No. Are you going to cry? Clara thought about it honestly. Not right now. Good. Lorraine pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down. Then sit with me and tell me what you know. They worked through it systematically. That was the only way Clara knew how to do anything. The bank accounts were gone. That much was confirmed. She pulled up the transfer records and traced them back 3 days, then 6, seeing the pattern of smaller movements before the final sweep. Slow bleeds, all of them authorized under Desmond's sole signature on accounts she'd trusted him to manage because he'd asked her to. Couples who trust each other don't audit each other. She could hear exactly how he'd said it. Reasonable, warm, slightly wounded, the way he looked whenever she asked too many questions. The house, Lorraine said, not asking. Let me look. It took her 11 minutes to find the property transfer record in the county database. The house with the high ceilings and the cream walls and the kitchen that caught the evening light, had been deeded to a holding company called Meridian Residential Holdings, LLC. The transfer date was 4 months ago. 4 months. She had been folding his shirts and cooking salmon and doing the grocery math in her head for 4 months after the house stopped belonging to her. Lorraine watched her read the screen, didn't touch her, didn't offer anything soft. "He asked me to stop checking," Clara said. Her voice was steady. "He said it was a trust thing, that I was treating our marriage like a risk portfolio." "And you stopped?" "I stopped." Lorraine folded her hands on the table. That wasn't love talking. That was strategy. Clara knew that. She had known it the moment she found the deed, maybe even before. She just needed to hear it said plainly, by someone who wouldn't dress it up. She nodded once and kept working. The emails took longer to get through. She went backward through 2 years of correspondence, his and hers both, the shared accounts they'd set up early in the marriage for household logistics. Most of it was ordinary: contractors, utilities, vendor quotes, the occasional dinner reservation. But near the bottom of a folder he'd labeled Dev Admin, she found an attachment, a pitch deck, 42 slides, clean and professional, branded with Desmond's development company logo. She opened it. The first 10 slides were his: market overviews, location renders, projected timelines, standard stuff, the kind of thing he'd always been good at, the visual storytelling, the confident sweep of it. Then, slide 11. She recognized it immediately, not because her name was on it, because her name wasn't. The risk model on that slide, the probability curves, the actuarial weight tables, the climate-adjusted vacancy projections. She had built that. She had built all of it over 6 quiet weeks the previous year, because he'd asked her to help him look sharper to a new group of investors. Informal, he'd said, just between them. She clicked forward, slide after slide after slide. Her frameworks, her methodology, her logic running through the whole architecture of his pitch, holding the weight of it up from the inside. Not one page carried her name. Clara set her phone down and picked up the printed copy from the home printer, the paper still warm, and held it in both hands. She had thought he left on impulse. Some crisis of feeling, some restless need she hadn't been enough to satisfy. But this deck had been shown to investors, which meant it existed before tonight, which meant he had been building something while she stood in this kitchen cooking dinner, and she had been the material he built it with. She sat with that for a long, still moment. This was not impulsive. This had been planned. The notice came on a Tuesday. It was printed on clean white letterhead, formal and polite, the way a knife can look clean before it cuts you. Meridian Residential Holdings, LLC was printed in small serif letters at the top. Below that, a paragraph of property management language that Clara read once quickly and then once slowly, the way she did when she needed to be sure she understood something correctly. 30 days. She was being asked to vacate the property within 30 days, as the current deed holder had no record of an ongoing residential tenancy requiring the premises. She set it on the kitchen counter, in the same spot where the note had been. Lorraine came over that afternoon. She read the letter standing up, coat still on, and when she finished, she set it down and looked at Clara. "He didn't just leave," Clara said. It wasn't a question. She needed to say it plainly. "He took the house before he left. He arranged all of it first." "Yes," Lorraine said. "I didn't choose to leave. He put me out." "Yes." Lorraine's voice didn't waver. "He did." Claire nodded. She needed that said out loud, too. Not because she doubted it, but because the world had a way of softening these things into something easier to swallow, and she didn't want it softened. She wanted it exact. She started packing that same afternoon. She didn't take much. She had never been someone who accumulated things carelessly, and most of what filled the house had been chosen by Desmond anyway. The heavy furniture, the art on the walls, the expensive coffee machine he'd wanted and she'd learned to use. None of it was hers in any way that mattered. What she took filled 6 boxes and 2 duffel bags. Her clothes, her books, her mother's old mixing bowls, which Lorraine had given her as a housewarming gift and which Desmond had always thought were too plain. The small framed photo of her and Lorraine at her college graduation, which had lived on the windowsill in the spare room because Desmond had said the kitchen felt too cluttered when there were photos up. And her work files. 3 full boxes of them. Old printouts, annotated reports, external hard drives, notebooks filled with her own handwriting. 15 years of thinking. Models she'd built for clients she'd left behind when Desmond said she should. Frameworks that now lived in other people's pitch decks without her name on them. She carried those boxes herself. Lorraine's spare room was small and yellow, the color of old butter, with a window that looked out onto the neighbor's oak tree. Clara made the bed and stacked her boxes along one wall and sat on the edge of the mattress for a moment. She didn't let herself feel small about it. She refused. The call came 3 days after she moved in. She was cross-referencing 2 of her old climate models, sorting through papers at Lorraine's kitchen table, when her phone rang with a number she recognized after a moment. Tobias Reyes. She had not spoken to him in almost 2 years. She answered. "I heard you were available," he said. No preamble, no performance. That was how Tobias always talked, straight through to the point. "I've been trying to recruit you for 2 years, and I never had the timing." "You have it now," she said. He told her what he was building, a climate risk insurance startup, models designed for communities that legacy insurers consistently mispriced or dropped entirely, coastal towns, flood-prone rural counties, places that carried real risk that nobody had bothered to calculate honestly. He had funding, a small team, and a gap at the top of the technical architecture that had been hers since the moment he'd imagined the company. Clara listened without interrupting. She turned a pen slowly in her fingers. When he finished, she said, "Send me what you have so far." He sent it within 10 minutes. She read through it that evening. The model's foundation was sound but incomplete. She could see exactly where the structure needed weight, the way she could always see it, quietly and immediately and without drama. They met 2 days later. Lorraine's dining room table, because Clara didn't have an office, and Tobias said he didn't care where they met. They talked for 3 hours. By the end of the first hour, it didn't feel like a job interview. It felt like 2 people finishing each other's sentences about a problem they both understood and neither of them had been able to solve alone. She signed the co-founder agreement before he left. That night, Lorraine made tea and they sat together at the kitchen table, the oak tree outside the window moving slowly in the dark. "How do you feel?" Lorraine asked. Clara thought about it honestly, the same way she thought about everything. "Like I'm just getting started," she said. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "He thinks he won. Let him think that for a while." Lorraine said nothing. She just nodded, slowly, and drank her tea. 3 years passed. Not slowly, not kindly, but honestly the way time passes when you are too busy building something to watch it go. Veritas Risk started in a 2-room office above a dry cleaner in the East Side. Clara and Tobias and 3 others, 2 data engineers and an underwriting specialist who'd left a major insurer after years of watching them mishandle exactly the communities Veritas was designed to serve. The work was dense and quiet and unglamorous. Long nights with datasets, presentations to skeptical investors who wanted legacy models dressed up in new language, rejections, revisions. Then the storms came. Back to back, 2 years in a row, a hurricane season that made the actuarial tables from legacy insurers look like they'd been written by people who'd never looked out a window, followed by a flood cycle along 3 river corridors that drowned every projection the big firms had floated. Veritas Risk's models had called both, not perfectly, not like prophecy, but close enough that the underwriters who had quietly bought into their framework walked away solvent when their competitors did not. The phones started ringing differently after that. By year 3, Veritas Risk was being discussed in financial press with words like revolutionary and undervalued and, increasingly, acquisition target. The valuation that had seemed impossible 2 years ago now sat comfortably at $100 million and was still climbing. Clara gave her first television interview on a Wednesday morning. She wore a navy blazer and no jewelry except small gold earrings that had been her grandmother's. She sat across from a financial journalist who seemed slightly surprised by how calm she was, and she spoke plainly about risk modeling, climate exposure, and what it meant to price uncertainty honestly. She did not mention Desmond. She did not think about him at all. Across town, in a new condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture Priya had chosen, a dinner party was wrapping up. Desmond was half listening to a conversation about interest rates when someone turned on the television in the background, a financial news segment, the kind that played with the sound low at parties like this. He glanced at the screen. He stopped. Clara's face. Calm and clear, looking directly at the camera the way she used to look at spreadsheets. Like the numbers already told her everything she needed to know, and she was simply deciding what to do with the information. The chyron beneath her read, Veritas Risk, CO-CEO, Clara Okafor, $100 million valuation. He heard her say the words, probability-weighted climate exposure, and vacancy adjustment model. And something went cold and fast through his chest, because he knew those words. He knew that model. He had stood in front of investors and delivered exactly those words as his own, 3 years ago, in a pitch deck with 42 slides and not one mention of her name. He picked up his phone. He called. She didn't answer. He called again. She didn't answer. He called her 37 times over the next 4 hours, each call bleeding into the next. His dinner guests left. Priya watched him from across the room with an expression he didn't notice and would not have known how to read. Clara's phone lit up and went dark, lit up and went dark, 37 times in a row. She was already asleep. Desmond's office was on the 14th floor, corner-facing, with a view of the city that he had specifically negotiated into his lease because impressions mattered, and nothing communicated stability like a high floor and clean glass. He had made that calculation consciously, the same way he made most decisions, from the outside in, starting with what people would see. This morning, the view wasn't doing anything for him. He paced the length of the window and back, then again. His phone sat on his desk like an accusation. 37 calls. He had counted them afterward, sitting in the quiet of the condo after the last guest left, and the number had embarrassed him in a way he hadn't expected. Not because he'd done something wrong, because she hadn't answered, not once, and the not answering felt deliberate in a way that ordinary silence didn't. He knew the difference. He had spent years reading rooms. "You're still doing it," Priya's voice came from the doorway. She had driven over from the condo after he'd left early without eating breakfast, which she'd taken as an invitation to follow rather than a signal to stay behind. That was Priya's way. She moved toward problems she found interesting and ignored the ones she didn't. "Doing what?" he said. He didn't stop pacing. "That thing with your jaw." She settled into the chair across from his desk and crossed one leg over the other, smoothing her skirt. She looked entirely unbothered, which was its own kind of pressure. "You clench it when you're embarrassed." "I'm not embarrassed. I'm irritated." "About the calls?" He didn't answer. "Desmond." Her voice was patient in the way of someone who had decided to wait him out. "She's your ex-wife. You called her 37 times. She didn't pick up. That's—" She tilted her head slightly. "It's worth understanding why that's bothering you so much." "It's not about her personally." He stopped at the window, his back to Priya now. "It's about the model. She's been running the model I built, Priya, the framework I used with our investors. She's calling it something else and putting it on television." Priya was quiet for a moment. "The model you built," she repeated. He turned. "Yes." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was nearly neutral. Nearly. And then she nodded once and let it go. She was smart enough to know which threads not to pull. The truth of their finances, which neither of them discussed in plain language, was this. Priya's family had money. Real money. The kind that had been in the family long enough that nobody talked about where it started. Commercial property in 2 cities, a portfolio of investments that her father managed with the specific pride of a man who had never needed anyone else to manage it for him. When Priya had told her father about Desmond, the conversation had been cautious. When the relationship had moved quickly, the caution had remained. What her father had not known, what Priya had not told him because some things were easier to arrange than to explain, was that certain assets had been moved during the months before Desmond's divorce from Clara was finalized. Shell arrangements. Holding structures that a good attorney could build in a few weeks if the client knew what they wanted and didn't ask too many questions about the long-term exposure. Priya had signed where she was asked to sign. She had believed, genuinely, that she was building something solid and protected, that the messiness of Desmond's first marriage was administrative rather than moral, a closing of one chapter before another could properly start. She had not thought about Clara when she signed those documents. She thought about her now, occasionally, in small and specific ways she kept to herself. The email came in just before 10 that morning. Clara was at her desk, working through a dataset on coastal property devaluation curves, when Tobias appeared in her office doorway, holding a printed page. "Coalition Underwriting Group," he said. "They want us to model risk for a new lender portfolio. 14 developments across 3 states." He set the paper on her desk. "They're coming to us specifically because of the hurricane season numbers." Clara set down her pen and looked at the page. The coalition was a group of regional lenders who had been quietly watching Veritas's performance for 18 months. They wanted a risk architecture built for a specific class of mid-size commercial developments, the kind that sat between small residential projects and large institutional builds, the bracket that legacy models handled most sloppily. She read the summary. Then she read the attachment list, the specific projects under the portfolio. She stopped at one name. It was a development in the Eastern Corridor, a mixed-use tower, 14 stories, construction 60% complete, current financing through one of the coalition's member lenders. The developer listed was Bell Capital Partners. She read it again, carefully, the way she always read things she wanted to be certain about. "Tobias," she said. She kept her voice exactly even. He looked up from where he'd turned to leave. "I want this assignment." He looked at her for a moment, steady, reading nothing more into it than she'd offered. Then he nodded. "I'll send the confirmation." The financial disclosures came in on a Tuesday, bundled in a secure upload from the coalition's coordinating lender. 3 folders, each one dense with project summaries, financing structures, and ownership documentation. Clara printed the key pages and spread them across her desk in overlapping rows, the way she'd always worked when she needed to see the whole shape of something at once. Tobias pulled a chair to the corner of her desk and started on the second folder. For a while, neither of them spoke. The office was quiet except for the sound of pages turning and the distant hum of the city 14 floors below. Clara was cross-referencing a financing ledger against the ownership structure on Bell Capital's mixed-use tower when she found it. A second funding line, smaller than the primary lenders, routed through an entity called Caldwell Shore Holdings, LLC. No address listed beyond a registered agent in Delaware. No obvious parent company. She circled it. "Tobias." He looked up. She slid the page across. "Third-party financing on the Bell project. I can't find any public record of this entity being connected to Bell Capital Partners." He took the page and studied it. "Could be a private bridge loan." "Could be, but look at the draw schedule." She pointed. "It doesn't track with construction milestones. It tracks with the lender reporting periods." Tobias was quiet for a moment. Someone was covering gaps. Someone was covering gaps, she agreed. It took 2 hours of additional digging, cross-referencing Delaware filings, matching registered agent names, pulling 3 years of publicly recorded business filings, before a name appeared. Vivian Castellano. The call came the next morning, before Clara had finished her first cup of coffee. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered. Clara Okafor Bell? The voice on the other end was calm, flat, and businesslike. A woman's voice, careful at the edges. This is Vivian Castellano. I expect you've recently come across my name. Clara set down her cup. I have. Then you understand why I'm calling. I'd rather you tell me. A short pause. When Vivian spoke again, her tone hadn't warmed, but it had shifted slightly. The shift of someone who had rehearsed this and was now simply executing it. I've been Desmond Bell's silent financing partner for 7 years. I have been patient with a great deal of his decision-making, because the returns were acceptable and his problems were manageable. Another pause. They are no longer manageable. Clara didn't say anything. She reached for a notepad and uncapped a pen. The tower you're reviewing, Vivian continued, was financed in its last round using occupancy projections that Desmond fabricated, pre-lease commitments that don't exist, anchor tenant agreements that were either falsified or misrepresented to the lender. I know this because I was present for several of the conversations in which he decided to do it. A beat. I am on record as a financing party. That means I am on record as someone who may have known. Did you? Clara asked. I knew enough, Vivian said, and her voice carried no guilt in it, only the flatness of a woman doing an honest accounting of her exposure. I am telling you now because I have no interest in being the last one standing when this structure collapses. I want distance. You, based on what I've read in the financial press, are in a position to create that distance. Clara wrote the word occupancy on the notepad, circled it. What documentation do you have? She asked. Vivian had documents. Internal communications. A version of the pre-lease summary submitted to the lender alongside the original, which Desmond had prepared himself and shared with Vivian for sign-off. A version with numbers that did not match the submission. She would send them. She asked for nothing except to be treated as a cooperative disclosure source, not a named party in any formal filing, if that became possible. Clara said she would note the request. She did not promise anything. One more thing, Vivian said. Her tone shifted again, almost offhand, as if this part were a footnote. The asset retitling from the divorce. The documents from 3 years ago. Several of them carry a second signature. Clara's pen stopped moving. Priya Anand, Vivian said. She signed them, not as a witness, as a named party to the arrangements. She knew what was being moved and why. I thought you should know that it's documented. Clara wrote the name. She kept her face still, though there was no one in the room to see it. Thank you, she said. I'll be in touch. She ended the call and sat for a moment without moving, looking at the notepad in front of her. 2 words. 2 circled names, a footnote that was not a footnote. Then she opened her desk drawer and took out a manila folder. She printed Vivian's follow-up documents when they arrived 40 minutes later, all 11 pages, and added them to the folder alongside her own notes, the circled ledger page, and the Delaware filing chain. She locked the folder in the bottom drawer of her desk and pocketed the key. When Tobias appeared in her doorway just before noon, she looked up without urgency. The underwriting review, she said. I want it done exactly by the book. Every number sourced, every disclosure verified, every finding documented the way it actually is. She held his gaze. No shortcuts, nothing extra. Just the truth. Tobias studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. By the book, he said. By the book, she agreed. The call came through the main line on a Thursday afternoon. Keisha, the front desk coordinator, knocked on Clara's open door and held out a slip of paper. A Desmond Bell says he's calling as a professional courtesy, wants to speak to you directly. Clara looked at the slip. His name, a number, and the word courtesy written in Keisha's neat print, with a small question mark after it. Put him through, Clara said. She waited through the transfer click. Then she heard his voice for the first time in 3 years. Clara. Warm, easy, like no time had passed at all. It's so good to hear your voice. She picked up a pen. Desmond, I've been trying to reach you for a while now. A small laugh, self-deprecating, practiced. I think my personal number probably went straight to voicemail. It did, she said. A beat. He moved past it smoothly. I saw the segment, on the news. Honestly, I wasn't surprised. I always knew you had something like this in you. I just never thought I'd be watching it on television. He laughed again. It was a generous laugh, designed to feel like a compliment. You look good, Clara. You sound like yourself. I'm glad. She wrote nothing. She held the pen loosely over the notepad and waited. I know things ended badly between us, he continued, and I've thought about that. I have. The way everything happened. It wasn't fair to you, and I think about that. His voice took on a careful softness, the kind that sounded like regret if you weren't listening too closely. You deserved a better conversation than what I gave you. I know that. Clara watched a pigeon settle on the window ledge across the street. She said nothing. The silence sat there long enough that he had to fill it. We built something together, he said. Those early years, the thinking we did together. I've never worked that way with anyone else. I mean that. He paused, letting that land. I guess I just want you to know there's no bad blood on my end. Whatever happened between us personally, professionally, I've always respected what you do. I appreciate you saying that, Clara said. Her voice was even. She could have been talking about the weather. Another pause, shorter this time. Then the pivot. Actually, Desmond said, his tone brightening, casual, like the thought had just occurred to him. I did want to mention something while I had you. I know Veritas has been brought in on some underwriting reviews, big coalition project, the kind of thing you're building toward now. A brief, easy chuckle. Small world, right? Turns out one of the projects in that review is mine, the mixed-use tower on the east side. I see, Clara said. I'm not asking for anything improper, he said quickly. Not at all. Look, we both know how these processes work. A lot of it comes down to how the model is framed, what gets weighted, how the analyst presents the findings. He let that sit. I just thought, given our history, given that there's no bad blood, it might be worth a conversation. You putting in a word with your team that the project's been solid, that the numbers hold up. Clara wrote word on the notepad. Then she put the pen down. I'll keep that in mind, she said. That's all I'm asking. His voice relaxed visibly. She could hear it, the tension releasing across the line, the way a man sounds when he believes he's gotten what he came for. You were always the reasonable one, Clara. That was always true. I remember, she said. We'll talk soon, he said. And hey, congratulations. Seriously, 100 million. That's something. He said it the way you compliment a child's drawing. Generous, conclusive. Take care of yourself. You too, she said. The line went quiet. She set the phone down and looked at the notepad. The single word she'd written looked small and very clear against the white paper. She crossed it out. That evening, an email arrived from Vivian. No subject line, one paragraph and a name at the bottom. One more thing I thought you should have. In the months after the divorce, Desmond spoke about the marriage to at least 3 people in our shared circle. Different conversations, same story. He said he left because he needed a wife who made him look like the smart one. Not because of money, not because of the life, because of that. I heard it twice myself, the third time from someone who had no reason to tell me except that they thought I should know. I'm telling you for the same reason. VC. Clara read it once. Then she read it again. She set her phone face down on the desk. She sat very still for a long moment, the kind of stillness that wasn't emptiness, but the opposite of it. A fullness that had nowhere to go and didn't need to. She had spent 3 years wondering, in the quiet hours, what the real answer was. Whether she had failed at something she could have fixed. Whether the gap between who she was and what the marriage became had been her fault to close. Now she had the answer in 11 words. He needed a wife who made him look like the smart one. Not her failure, his fear. She had always known the difference, somewhere underneath. But knowing something and having it written down in someone else's handwriting were not the same thing. She pulled the notepad toward her and drew a single, clean line under everything she'd written that day. Then she closed it. The report took 11 days to complete. Clara and Tobias worked through it the same way they worked through everything, methodically, without shortcuts, without any move that could be questioned later. Every figure cross-referenced, every assumption documented, every source cited by page and line number. There was no need to tilt anything. That was the part Clara had understood from the beginning, back when she'd first told Tobias to take the assignment. The numbers didn't need help. They just needed to be read correctly, by someone who knew what they were looking at. She knew what she was looking at. On the last evening before submission, she and Tobias sat across from each other at the long table in the Veritas conference room, the final draft spread between them in printed sections. The windows behind Tobias showed the city going dark, lights coming on in the buildings across the street, floor by floor. Occupancy claims versus actual lease agreements, Tobias said, tapping the second section. 41% variance on the East Tower alone. 43, Clara said. I updated the figure after the last document pull. He looked at the page, nodded. 43. She turned to the third section. Debt service ratio doesn't match the revenue projections at any point in the 5-year window. Not 1 quarter. She set it flat on the table. He told the lenders the building was performing. The building was not performing. And the retitling documents. Exhibit D, she said. Tobias flipped to it. He'd seen it before. He looked at it again anyway, the way you look at something a second time, not because you missed it the first time, but because it still surprises you. Both signatures were there, Desmond's in his tall, forward-leaning hand, and Priya's underneath, smaller and precise. Dated 14 months before Clara had received her eviction notice. 14 months before she'd been told, officially, that the house had never really been hers. This goes to the coalition as is, Tobias said. As is, Clara confirmed. He signed the cover page. She signed beside him. The report was submitted the following morning at 9:14. The questions started reaching Desmond's investors within the week. Clara knew because Vivian sent a single text message. They're asking. And nothing else. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She went back to work. She was reviewing a separate risk model on a Tuesday morning, coffee going cold beside her laptop, when Keisha appeared in the doorway again. This time, there was no slip of paper. Keisha's expression said enough. He's here, she said. In person. I told him you don't take walk-ins. He said he'd wait. Clara set down her pen. How long has he been there? About 20 minutes. He's been standing the whole time. She thought for a moment. Send him back. She heard him before she saw him, his footsteps quick and uneven, the sound of a man who'd spent the walk down the hallway rehearsing something and then forgotten half of it by the time he arrived. He looked different than she remembered. Still put together on the surface, the good coat, the watch, the haircut that cost more than most people's grocery bills, but something underneath all of it had shifted. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved too fast around the room before they settled on her. Clara. He stepped inside without being invited. We need to talk. Sit down, Desmond. He didn't sit. He put both hands on the back of the chair across from her desk, gripping it like he needed something to hold on to. I've had 3 investors call me in 5 days, he said. 3. Asking about occupancy data, asking about the financing structure on the East Tower. His voice had an edge she recognized. Not quite anger yet, but the thing that came just before it when a man realized charm wasn't going to be enough. That's your report. That's coming from your review. The report was submitted to the Lending Coalition, Clara said. It reflects our findings. Your findings. He let out a short, disbelieving breath. Clara, come on. Those numbers. The way a model gets framed, the way things get weighted. You know how this works. You built models for me for 6 years. He spread his hands. This doesn't have to go where it's going. You have standing with these people. One conversation. That's all it takes. She looked at him evenly. I can't discuss the contents of an active underwriting review. I'm not asking you to discuss it. He pushed off the chair. I'm asking you to fix it. The word landed in the room and sat there. Fix it. As though the 43% variance in occupancy claims was a typo. As though Priya's signature on those retitling documents was a formatting error. As though 3 years of work, 11 days of honest analysis, and a report that said exactly what the truth required it to say were all just a rough draft she could revise if he asked nicely enough. She picked up her pen. I'll see you at the hearing, Desmond. He stared at her. For a moment she thought he was going to say something else. There was a word forming behind his eyes, something sharp and unguarded. But it didn't come out. He straightened. He buttoned his coat with 2 sharp, mechanical movements. Then he walked out. She heard his footsteps all the way down the hall. She heard the elevator. Then there was nothing. She looked back at her screen, found her place in the model, and kept working. The hearing room was on the 14th floor of a downtown office building, in a space that looked like it couldn't decide if it was a boardroom or a courtroom. Long table at the front, rows of chairs behind it, high ceilings that made every sound echo just a little too long. Clara arrived 20 minutes early. She set her materials at the seat assigned to her, the Veritas Risk Representative position, 3rd chair from the left, and arranged them the way she arranged everything. Report on top, supporting exhibits beneath, tabbed and numbered. Her notes on a single index card, though she doubted she'd need them. She knew every figure in the document the way a pianist knows a piece they've performed 100 times. Not from memory alone, from understanding. The room filled slowly. Lenders' attorneys first, arriving in pairs, wheeling hard-sided cases. Then the auditors from the regulatory office, quieter, finding seats along the side wall. Then Desmond's legal team, 3 of them, all wearing the careful, pressed expressions of people billing by the hour and trying not to look worried. Desmond came in last. He wore a dark suit, well-fitted, the kind of outfit chosen to project stability. His attorney leaned over and said something to him in a low voice as they took their seats. Desmond nodded, but his eyes had already found Clara across the room. She had looked up because the room shifted slightly when the door opened, that small change in air pressure when someone important to the proceedings arrives. Their eyes met for 2 seconds, maybe 3. She looked back down at her report. The hearing officer, a compact woman named Ms. Delaney with silver-framed reading glasses and a voice like someone who had stopped tolerating nonsense long ago, called the session to order at 9 o'clock exactly. Clara was asked to present first. She stood and spoke the way she always spoke, clearly, without decoration, without any extra words. The Veritas Risk Underwriting Review was commissioned by the Lending Coalition to evaluate risk exposure on the Bell Meridian East development, she began. Our findings identified 3 material discrepancies between the documentation provided to lenders and the verified conditions of the asset. She walked through the first one, occupancy figures. The official records submitted to secure financing showed the East Tower at 81% occupancy during the key underwriting window. Clara's team had cross-referenced every lease agreement on file, verified against the building's utilities records and rental payment history. The actual occupancy rate during that same window was 38%. A lawyer at the back table wrote something on a legal pad. She heard the scratch of his pen from across the room. She moved to the second finding. Valuations. The development had been assessed using comparable properties that did not, in fact, compare. The comps Desmond's team submitted had cherry-picked figures from 2 zip codes over, from a different class of building, during a peak market period that had since corrected. The real current valuation of the asset, modeled against accurate comparables, came in at 31% below what the lenders had been told. The auditors along the sidewall exchanged a look. The third finding, Clara said, involves asset retitling that occurred in the 14 months prior to the divorce settlement between Desmond Bell and his former spouse. She did not say me. She did not need to. Exhibit D contains the full chain of documentation. Both Mr. Bell's and Ms. Anand's signatures appear on the retitling instruments, dated and notarized, confirming that both parties were knowing participants in the transfer of assets into shell-holding arrangements during the period in question. She set the exhibit on the table in front of her. That is the conclusion of our findings. I'm available to answer questions. The questions lasted 40 minutes. Clara answered each one the same way she'd built the report, methodically, directly, without a single unnecessary word. When one of Desmond's attorneys suggested the occupancy variance could be explained by administrative errors in record-keeping, she cited 3 separate document sources, by exhibit number, that made the administrative error theory impossible to sustain. The attorney did not follow up. She sat down. She did not look at Desmond, but she was aware of him the way you're always aware of someone sitting very still when everyone else in the room is moving. He hadn't spoken. His attorneys had handled everything on his side, or tried to. By the end, they had largely stopped trying. The financing didn't survive the week. The lending coalition issued a formal notice within 3 days. 2 lenders moved to accelerate their debt positions. The development, Bell Meridian East, was placed into receivership pending full audit. The words repossession proceedings appeared in the legal paperwork filed on Friday afternoon. Priya's name appeared in the regulatory record on Thursday. Her family's statement came the day after, a brief, formal release from her father's firm, the kind of language that said everything while appearing to say nothing. The Anand family has no ongoing financial interest in or association with the Bell Meridian development or its related entities. They had withdrawn. Quietly, completely, and publicly enough that anyone who mattered would know what it meant. Clara heard about what happened in the parking lot from Vivian, who had it from someone who had been 3 cars away. Priya had been waiting for Desmond when he came out of the building after the hearing. She was standing beside the car, not leaning against it, standing beside it, the way a person stands when they've decided they're not going anywhere until they've been heard. "My father called me," Priya said, when Desmond reached her. "During the hearing. He called me to tell me what my name was attached to. He read it to me from the regulatory filing." "Priya, don't." Her voice was low and controlled and extremely cold. "You told me those transfers were standard. You told me it was just restructuring." "It was restructuring." "My signature is in a fraud finding, Desmond." She said it like she was explaining something to someone who needed it explained slowly. "My name, in a federal regulatory record. My father's attorneys are now involved." She paused. "Do you understand what that means for me? What you've made this into?" Desmond ran a hand through his hair. "We can get ahead of it. I have people. You have nothing." She said it quietly, and the quietness of it was worse than if she'd shouted. "You have a building in receivership, 3 lenders calling in their notes, and a fraud finding with both our names on it." She opened the car door. "Your people couldn't keep 43% of your tenants from not existing. What exactly are they going to fix?" He stood there in the parking lot with the afternoon light falling flat and gray across the concrete, his coat open, his face doing something complicated that couldn't settle on one expression. She got in the car. She did not look at him through the window. He stood there a moment longer, alone, in the space between the building he no longer owned and the car he could no longer afford. And for the first time since this had all begun, there was no one left to smooth anything over for him. The knock came on a Tuesday evening, just after 6. Clara was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside her laptop, reviewing a draft term sheet for the next funding round. Lorraine was in the living room with the television on low, some cooking program she half watched and half talked back to. 3 knocks, then 2 more. Lorraine appeared in the kitchen doorway, one eyebrow raised. Clara had already recognized the pattern. Desmond had always knocked that way, like he expected the door to open before he finished. "You don't have to answer it," Lorraine said. "I know." Clara closed the laptop. "I want to." She walked to the front door and opened it. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically. He still had the same broad shoulders, the same careful posture he'd practiced for investor meetings. But something underneath all of it had gone slack. His suit was still pressed, because some habits don't break easily, but there were shadows under his eyes that no amount of good tailoring could address. The car parked at the curb behind him was not the one he'd driven 3 years ago. "Clara," he said, like her name was the opening sentence of an argument he hadn't finished preparing. She didn't step back from the door. She didn't invite him in. Lorraine appeared at her shoulder a moment later, arms folded, saying nothing. Just present. A fact, the way walls are facts. Desmond looked at Lorraine briefly, then back at Clara. "I was hoping we could talk." "We can talk here," Clara said. A flicker of something moved across his face. He'd expected to be let inside. He shifted his weight. "Priya's gone. The Meridian is... you know what it is." He paused, as if waiting for her to fill the silence with sympathy. She didn't. "I've been thinking a lot about where things went wrong between us. What we both could have handled differently." "We both." She noticed the word. "I made mistakes," he continued. His voice found a lower, more sincere register. He'd always been good at that, locating the frequency that sounded like honesty. "I know that. But we had something real, Clara, before everything got complicated. I think there's a version of this where we—" "No," she said. Just that. Clean and flat. He blinked. "If you just let me—" "You took my work," she said. "The risk models I built for you off the books, after hours, because you said you needed help looking sharper for investors. You put them in a pitch deck, sent them to private equity, and took my name off every page." She said it the same way she'd presented the occupancy figures at the hearing. No heat, just the facts, laid down one after another. "You had the deed to this house, to our house, transferred into a shell company before you ever told me the marriage was over. You drained the accounts the same night you left, and you left a note that took you about 40 seconds to write." He opened his mouth. She kept going. "You asked me to quit my job. You framed it as trust, as us becoming something better together." She paused, just briefly. "You needed me smaller. That's what it was. You've told people that yourself, that you needed a wife who made you look like the smart one. I know you said that. I know when you said it and who was in the room." The color shifted in his face. "I rebuilt everything you took," Clara said. "Not to hurt you, because it was mine to rebuild. The work was always mine. The thinking was always mine. You just had it for a while because I let you, and because I didn't understand yet what you were doing with it." Desmond's jaw tightened. He looked for just a moment like he was going to argue, going to reach for something, some version of the story where he came out better. She could see him searching for it. The pivot, the reframe, the charm-forward deflection that had always worked before. There was nothing left to reach for. "I don't hate you," she said. "I want you to understand that clearly because I don't want you to misread this as emotion. This is information. There is no version of what you're asking for that I will consider. Not reconciliation, not a conversation, not goodwill." She held his gaze. "We're done. We have been done. This is the last time I'll say it because it's the last time we'll speak." Desmond stood on the porch of the house where Clara had once slept in a spare room with nothing to her name but an old laptop and a co-founder agreement, and he had no answer. Not a real one. He made a sound, something that was almost a word, and then stopped. There was nothing left. No leverage. No angle. No version of his charm that had anywhere to land. Clara stepped back and closed the door. The latch clicked into place. Behind her, without a word, Lorraine reached out and turned the deadbolt. The lock made a clean, solid sound in the quiet house. The check cleared on a Wednesday morning. $100 million. Official. final. Hers and Tobias's in equal measure, the way it had always been structured, the way they had always intended it. Clara read the wire confirmation twice, not because she doubted it, but because she was an actuary, and checking twice was just how her mind worked. Then she set her phone face down on her desk and sat quietly for a moment, listening to the office around her. The low hum of keyboards, someone laughing down the hall, the sound of a company that was real. Tobias knocked on the open door and leaned against the frame, coffee in hand, the same easy posture he'd had the first day he called her at her mother's kitchen table 3 years ago. "Well?" he said. "Well," she agreed. He raised his mug, she raised hers. That was enough. The Women in Finance Summit was held at a conference center downtown, all high ceilings and pale wood, and 300 women who had fought hard to be in the same room together. Clara stood backstage with her notes on a single index card, which she hadn't looked at once. Old habit. She didn't need the notes. She'd lived the speech. Out in the audience, somewhere in the 4th row, Lorraine Okafor sat in a borrowed blazer she'd refused to let Clara buy her, arms crossed, reading glasses pushed up into her graying hair, waiting. Clara walked out to the podium. The applause came quickly, warm and real. She let it settle before she spoke. "I want to start with something I used to believe," she said, her voice clear and steady in the big room. "I used to believe that being quiet about what I was worth was the same as being professional. That making myself smaller in rooms where other people needed to feel large was a kind of generosity." She paused. "It wasn't. It was a habit I learned in a life that no longer exists, and it cost me more than I want to spend the next hour calculating." Quiet laughter moved through the audience. "I'm an actuary," she continued. "My whole career is built on modeling risk, understanding what failure looks like before it happens, so that other people don't have to absorb the loss blind. And for a long time, I applied that skill to everything except my own life." She looked out at the room. "I missed the risk that was closest to me. I let someone convince me that my value was something they were generously tolerating, rather than something I'd built and earned. When that arrangement collapsed, I had no assets, no home, and a co-founder agreement printed on copy paper." She smiled, small and dry. 3 years later, I have a $100 million company." The applause this time was louder. She found Lorraine in the 4th row without trying. Her mother was not clapping. She was just watching, jaw set, eyes bright, the way Lorraine had always expressed the things she didn't have words for. Clara held her gaze for half a second, then looked back at the room. Tobias was waiting at the side door when she came off stage, handing her a water bottle without being asked. "Good?" he said. "Good," she said. He fell into step beside her, already pulling up his phone to check their afternoon schedule. A partnership review at 2, a call with their lead data engineer at 4. The ordinary machinery of a company that was still moving, still building, still finding new problems to solve. He didn't mention the speech. He didn't need to. Between them, professional respect had never required decoration. Lorraine found her in the hallway, and for a moment didn't say anything either. Just put a hand briefly on Clara's arm, the way she had in the spare bedroom 3 years ago when Clara had signed a co-founder agreement and said, "He thinks he won." "You looked like yourself up there," Lorraine said finally. "I know," Clara said. It was later, near the end of the day, that Vivian's message came through. A single text, brief and businesslike the way Vivian always was. "Heard through a contact, Dee is doing residential consulting now. Small jobs. The Meridian Group won't touch him. P filed separately 6 months ago. Thought you should know." Clara read it once. She noted it the same way she noted any piece of information. Filed it, assessed its relevance, moved on. Desmond was rebuilding from nearly nothing, his reputation in the development world gone, Priya long since removed from the picture. The news landed with less weight than a revised actuarial table. She set the phone down and reached for her bag. It buzzed again as she slung the strap over her shoulder. The screen lit up with a number she still recognized, Not because she'd kept it saved, but because some things just don't leave memory easily. A 38th call. She looked at it for exactly as long as it took to feel nothing. Then she pressed the side button and silenced it, slipped the phone into her bag, and pushed open the door to the boardroom at the end of the hall. The table was long and clean. The chairs were filled with her people. The room smelled like coffee and fresh paper and work that mattered. Clara walked to the head of the table and sat down. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day.